Profits are really getting everybody excited, so I appreciate that. Yeah, so we're ready to go. And we'll be going live in momentarily. All right, so welcome everybody. We're at the Sauble Conservation Authority meeting. It's Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. And we're calling this meeting to order at 1:16. So we'll start with the first item, with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires known as the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. And further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. We are on item number 2, disclosure of pecuniary interests. Does anybody have any interest pecuniary to share at this point in time? As I see none, just a reminder that you may always bring that up as we go along with the meeting. Item 3, call for additional agenda items. Any additional items or changes? Okay, so I do not see any. So we will go to item number 4, adoption of the agenda. That the Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors approve the agenda of October 23rd, 2024. Moved by Member Bell and a second by Member Shaw. Any further discussion? As I see none, so we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving to item number 5, approval of minutes. That the Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors approve the full authority minutes of September 25th, 2024. We have a mover. Member Colton and second by Member Mackey. Any discussion? So I see none, so we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? Opposed? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 6, business out of minutes. So there are none at this time. And we're moving quickly up to item 7, the consent agenda. Are there any items that anybody would like to pull? Okay, so I'll read the motion. That in consideration of the consent agenda items listed on the October 23rd, 2024 agenda, the Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors receives the following items. Environmental planning, section 28 permits, September 2024. 2, administration, receipts and expenses, September 2024. 4, Conservation Authority Council meetings, council minutes, April 15, 2024. And 6, recent media articles. Mover. Member Gregg and a seconder, Member Shaw. The floor is open for any discussion on those items. Member Colton.
Christian, what happened to item 3? We went from 2 to 4.
There was none.
Oh, okay.
Any other discussion? I see none, so we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving to section 8, we have the business items. And the first one is the watershed-based resource management strategy draft. CEO, are you speaking to that?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. As you're aware, in late 2021, 2022, Some changes to provincial regulation required that conservation authorities do some additional tasks that we didn't previously have to do. And one of those is a watershed-based resource management strategy. So what this consists of is essentially a summary of the existing programs that we offer, a summary of the technical studies that we rely on to inform our decisions for these programs, issues and risks assessment as we see it for these programs and services, and then a resource cost assessment to through what it would cost or to address all of these issues or risks. So at the end of the day, when we went through this process, it didn't end up being a strategy so much as a gap analysis of the program areas that we have and any deficiencies or barriers that we see in those programs. So we went through quite a bit of work to do that gap analysis. That started with at a very basic level, looking at what the legislation says the mandatory requirements are for each of those programs, identifying how well we were accomplishing those mandatory requirements versus what's reasonably feasible for this organization, as well as how it's being done throughout the rest of the province. We identified deficiencies, issues, and risks associated with that. So as an example, if we figured we were doing a 5 on one of the program areas, the issues and risks are very low. If we saw that we were 2 or 3, there's a lot more issues and risks associated that need to be addressed. So we went through those with all staff to identify what those would be. And we went through a brainstorming exercise with all relevant staff into groups by service areas of what possible solutions are for those issues and risks. We took all of those potential problems and all of those potential solutions. We sort of boiled them down to key factors. And then we sat down with the senior management team to look at, do we actually have a need for these solutions that addresses the risk that we have? And is it feasible for us to undertake this particular solution? After doing that, we then looked at all the costs associated with that. So if we deemed that, yes, it is a need and yes, it is reasonably feasible, then we looked at it from both the staffing resource, what would the staffing resource need to be able to do that? I.e., can we do it within our existing resource base? Or if we wanted to accomplish this, would we need to expand that resource base? And also from a financial perspective, could we do this within the existing budget constraints, or would we need to expand those budget constraints if we wanted to address this issue and risk? After going through all of those, we rolled them all up and looked at them organizationally wide. So the rationale there is if in each of the service areas we needed 0.1 of a person, well, then when we step back and look at it organizationally wide, we say, is it reasonable to suggest that 1 FTE would be the type of person that could do all of those things? So they all fall into a similar grouping such that 1 person or half a person could do those, as opposed to expecting that you're going to have a unicorn type person that's going to do 9 totally different things. So following up on that, we put together this report, and as you go through the report, you'll see that each program area is described and the issues and risks associated with each program area are identified, and then potential solutions to those issues and risks are identified. A little table at the end of each program area that has a cost associated with it, and that cost identifies whether that is, if we had to bring on new staff, what would those staff cost? And if there were materials and supplies or contracts and services associated with that, or reserve build in some cases, what would that cost? So the really important thing to remember here is that this document is not saying we're going to seek all of these resources. What this is doing is identifying where the deficiencies are within the organization and putting a dollar value on this. Moving forward, as we go through strategic plans or any other changes to the organization, we can look back on this or amend it as we move forward to say, if there's a problem within the organization or there's a challenge that we want to address, we've already given that background thought to how we would do that, what it would cost to do that. So these things are more transparent for us to be able to look at. So the two things that we're not doing with this is we have not identified if we tackled any of those challenges, where that funding would come. So this is not a document saying that this is going to be, we have a $1.3 million annual shortfall and that's going to come from the, we're not saying that. And we're also not saying that the plan right now is to tackle all these things, but it is identifying them so that the board's aware of them, so that our municipal partners are aware of them, so that the public is aware of them. So we do have them broken down by program area here. We tried to look at it over a 10-year horizon. So if it was something like a staff person, then it's an annual cost that's put in and said, this is what it would cost to have the staff person on, and this is an annual cost. If it were something like capital, we would actually look at it the other way and say, this is our 10-year forecast for capital in this program area. We're going to divide that by 10 to get the annual cost, just to flatten out the peaks and valleys of addressing capital. So when we look at all of those tables holistically, we are looking at $1.3 million annual shortfall to address everything that was identified. And that's not including drinking water source protection. So if we include drinking water source protection, it bumps it up closer to 1.6 million. The reason is that the province is currently footing the bill for $230,000 a year for source water. One of the risks identified there was if the province ceased to fund that, then that would have to go out to levy for that program. Keep going. So it's a risk. Right now, it's not a reality. Again, this document is about looking at what those potentials are. So what the proposal is now is we do have to have this document completed by the end of the year. We do have to consult on it. We do plan to put this on the website to allow people from the general public to comment, but really this is more about a discussion with municipal partners about are there any things concern here? Are there any service areas that you want to see these challenges addressed? And if they are, as the primary funding, that would have to be part of the discussion. So the goal right now is to send this directly to our municipal partners, to send it directly to the Sauble Coalition and Métis Nation of Ontario, and to post it on our website. We plan to bring it back to the board at the November meeting for funding. This can be considered to be a living document. It can be something that we can come back to again in the future, and certainly within this report, there is a procedure for doing that, to say that it doesn't just sit on a shelf, but it does get revisited from time to time. So through you, Madam Chair, I would welcome any questions or comments.
All right, thank you, Tim. The floor is open. Questions, discussions? Member Farmer?
Thanks. Hoping you can hear me okay. Yep. Okay. So the combination of this report and the budget through the chair made me think about our obvious financial constraints. And I think that anytime that we generate a document that makes the gap between what we could be doing at the height of our expertise and ability for the best possible service and what we have funding to do gives us a speaking point for advocacy or awareness raising about the organization. I'm curious to hear from Tim whether the watershed report or the budget could be leveraged for that kind of advocacy, either with our MPP and provincial partners, knowing that the intention was to have some ongoing dialogue with MPP buyers over this term, or if the timing might not be right for that kind of outward highlighting of the impacts of our financial constraints. Hope that made sense.
CEO Lanter?
Thank you. Member Farmer, at this point, we're not planning to do that, but I think the time to do that would be when we go through our strategic, like when we start wrapping up our strategic planning exercise, to say if we're planning to do X through our strategic plan, to address an issue or a challenge within the organization to make the organization better, what does that cost? And now we have a much better handle on what that cost is so that we can make informed decisions about how we want to move forward. And I think to your point about leveraging these, there's two things that we'll want to consider when we start looking at the strategic plan in that light is, one is budget. What is it going to cost to do this? But the other side of that, aside from budget, is how important is it for us to do this? And what is the risk of not doing it? So those are the things that we'll have to weigh and balance when we get to that point in the strategic plan, which we're almost at. But I think having done this gap analysis through the watershed strategy provides really good grounding to have those discussions as we move forward.
Follow-up, Member Farmer? Great, thank you. Member Greg?
Yeah, I guess my question is, it's also how it relates to the budget. And I've got a bunch of numbers that I'll speak to later, but if I go back to 2020, for instance, we had a just under $3 million budget, and we're just under $4 million budget projected for 25. We've been doing actions in the last 5 years that try to respond to, policy directives or new initiatives that the board, puts out there. So I'm curious, what have we responded to in the last 5 years when there's so much more still in here? And are there initiatives that the board are putting in place that's driving some of the new FTEs? Because we were functioning, I think, really good 5 years ago with the complement that we had at a certain dollar amount. And while we've increased the budget significantly in those 5 years, it seems like when you read this, it's not really recognizing or coming through what we've done in the last 5 years for those funds. And then I have some questions such as like 2 arborists. It's fine to hire 2 arborists, but alongside that comes the truck and comes all the ancillary costs. So how do we consider contract work, for instance, where there's need? How's that integrated into this document instead of evaluating it just as new resources that come on board that are expensive?
See you, Lance.
Absolutely. Those are excellent questions. So in terms of the change in how we've addressed things over the last 5 years, I'm not prepared to provide a fulsome answer on that right now, but we could certainly come back. Our update to the strategic plan, or the wrap up rather, the last strategic plan included a lot of that information in terms of, things that we've accomplished over the last 5 years leading up to this. Some of those things, when we talk about the budget is increased by $500,000 over that time frame, some of the things is we've started generating a lot more revenue from paid parking. But there's been a cost associated with that too. So we've had to onboard staff to do it, but we've also had the opportunity to onboard some staff to help out in areas where we have deficiencies in addressing the properties, just that we haven't addressed all of those issues yet. Some of the other things we see is that we increased planning and regulation fees, and we have onboarded staff to that end, and that is serving us very, very well, but it's not filling the gap from that side of things. And we could look at that in more detail, certainly, as we go through the next phase of our strategic plan. In terms of the arborist, that was a decision that we made based on what it costs to take down a handful of trees when we contract that out to an arborist company to come and take down a few trees. It's very, very expensive. So when we got looking at the number of ash trees that we have to deal with across our properties and across our trails, we made a decision that it would be less expensive to actually have those staff have people on staff doing that than it would be to contract that out. As we're not planning to move forward with that at this time, that is something we bring forward, those 2 numbers. But I think what we'll find is when it costs $2,000 to drop a single tree, that having staff on be less expensive than doing that. That's the logic.
Follow-up, Member Greg?
No, it's just in draft form yet. So, I mean, if there's any you get an opportunity down the road to speak to anything and place today that you're not prepared to as well, so.
Okay, thank you for that. Further comments? Member Dane?
If I heard and interpreted correctly, this can be a living document, but isn't necessarily a living document at this point in time. And you mentioned that some steps could be taken to implement that classification as a living document. Can you expand on what we would need to do to turn this into something that can be changed over the years?
Well, no, it is intended
It is,
for that,
okay.
yeah. So there's already wording within the document that says we'll come back to it periodically
Okay.
and review it, make sure it's still relevant and changes we would consult on it. So the goal is that it would maintain that way. I just, for internal resources and use, we wouldn't do that anyway. Certainly on a minimum 5-year period, come back, we revisit it, see where we're at.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, I will admit that it's been a heavy agenda day for me. So.
Thank you for that question. Any further comments? Okay, so I don't see any, so we'll get to the motion. Whereas Ontario Regulation 686/21, mandatory programs and service regulation, requires conservation authorities to develop and implement a watershed-based resource management strategy on or before December 31st, 2024. And whereas Grey Sauble Conservation Authority has developed a draft strategy, and that the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors directs staff to circulate the strategy for consultation. A mover, Member Carlton, and Member Farmer is seconding. So last comments, Member Gray.
I do have a follow-up question then. So the province directed this. In undertaking the initiative from staff, did staff recognize any real benefit from the province saying thou shalt undertake this? Like, can staff actually say, hey, you know what, that was a good idea and we realize that this is a good document to go forward with, or really it doesn't really change anything? But it certainly wasted a whole bunch of our time putting this together.
A very fair question. See you later.
Thank you, Member Greg. I don't think staff are saying that. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we put together a good document. A lot of work went into it and a lot of thought went into it to draw out the information that we've drawn out. Would we have done this at this particular point in time had it not been mandated? No. It was a substantial amount of work at a time we have a lot of work to do. But I think that moving forward, it'll provide good information to inform us on, especially, like I said, the strategic plan decisions that we're about to make in the next couple of months, that we can now start to look and say, what would the cost of doing X be? Well, we may have the answer to that already.
Okay. Well, it just sounds like, I guess, from a Conservation Ontario perspective, if you're in a meeting and you had the opportunity to be with the minister as as senior staff, my assumption might be that staff might say, well, it was kind of okay that you had us do this, but at the end of the day, you really did just tie up a lot of resources and it didn't really achieve anything necessary. So in the future, if you're going to cut red tape and advocate that you're cutting red tape, perhaps communicate better. We can be a better partner or inform your decision-making better.
Thank you for those comments. And very, so I will say just a quick comment, a very informative document and dovetails very nicely with strategy work. So I think it does complement what we are doing. So it is very helpful. So thank you for all those comments. Anything further? Okay, we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? Okay, that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So moving along in our agenda, business item B, awarding of auditor tender resolution. I have number 7. Okay, and we have a presentation on that. So thank you, Manager Armstrong.
So yeah, I'll just give you the background. At the August Board of Directors meeting, the board directed staff to send an RFP out for our audit services for the next 5-year period. Baker Tilly has been our auditor for the last 10 years of audits. And we do renew this every 5 years as a rule. So on September the 4th, an RFP was issued. It was posted on the Grace Sauble website and on the Merck's site. And it was sent out to our existing auditor and a previous auditor that we have participated in our RFP over the last number of times. On October the 4th, that RFP closed, and we had a committee of 2 board members and our CAO and myself open the proposals, and we got together and we graded the proposals. We had 3 respondents. The first respondent was Baker Tilly, our existing auditor, BDO and One Sound, and a new firm that we had not heard of before from Ottawa, called Lacadier. So we graded each respondent and averaged the scores. We came up with a score for Baker Tilly of 96.75, BDO 88.75, and Lacadier 70.67. The highest weight for the vote or the grading was price, and Baker Tilly came in as the most reasonably priced. In the report, I've indicated each year over year cost for the audit. And looks like year 1 for Baker Tilly is $22,000. So the committee has made the recommendation that we reappoint Baker Tilly as our auditor next 5-year.
Great, thank you for that. Questions, Member Mackey?
No, sorry, Madam Chair, I was just going to move the motion.
Right. Okay, so we're moving the motion. Maybe I'll just read out that motion. So whereas the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors passed resolution FA-24-068 at the August 28th, 2024 full authority meeting, directing staff to issue an RFP for audit services for the 5-year period commencing with 2024. And whereas staff recommended a selection committee be established to review and prepare a recommendation, and whereas Grace Sauble Conservation Authority staff issued an RFP to this effect on September 4th, 2024, and received 3 proposals, that the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors award Baker Tilly SGB LLP the contract for audit services for the 5-year term, 2024 to 2029. And so that is moved by Member Mackey and a seconder, Member Bell. Thank you. Member Farmer?
Sorry, just offering
you're-
a second.
So any further questions or comments? Okay, so I see none. I'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so we're moving along to item C, the 2025 draft budget for circulation resolution. CEO Lanter, will you be presenting?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So hopefully everyone's had a chance to review the staff report, the draft budget, and the budget companion that provides some details on what we have accomplished in the last year, what we're looking to accomplish in the upcoming year, and the breakdown of the proposed budget. So as we went through this, we've tried to be as conservative as feasible with the budget, to the point of even going in and scraping some things back to try and keep the costs down. In 2025, approximately 50% of the budget is self-generated. About 7% comes from the province, and the remainder comes from municipal levy. And you'll see that over 2024, the total budget amount remains approximately the same, but there is an increase in levy, and this is tied to both an anticipated drop in self-generated revenue, as well as a reduced dependence on surplus and reserves. So we had been carrying some things along with surplus and reserve, and we're trying to move out of that. That's obviously unsustainable in the longer term. So I would note that based on where we're at with the building construction, that we haven't included those numbers in this budget at this time, but we will likely include those numbers prior to the final approval of this budget. And I've set up meetings with all of your municipal councils to talk about the budget, or set up delegations rather, with all of your municipal councils to talk about the budget and to talk about the building, so that we can have an open discussion and answer any questions that councils may have. Some of the notable changes from 2024 to 2025 are reduced revenue and expenses in environmental planning. Obviously, you're aware that a few years ago, we went through a review, a service review with Watson and Associates of our planning fees, and we targeted for 100% cost recovery on those. We can't actually receive 100% cost recovery because some of the services that we provide don't have a cost associated with them. So if we're enforcing the regulation under violations, there's no fee associated with that. And the public service work that we do with just answering calls from people, there's some fee associated with that. So can't actually hit 100%. We move to be as close as we can. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is year over year, we're not realizing the numbers that were anticipated by the Watson review. And the challenge that we realize now, pushing towards 100% cost recovery from user fees, is that there's very little buffer built in when you don't realize those costs. There is no shortage of work for our staff in that department. Nonetheless, we have a position that was vacant, and we have scraped that out of the budget this year to reduce the expenses within that department and have lowered the anticipated self-generated revenue accordingly. We have reduced revenue and expenses in our forestry department associated with less tree planting. This number does not impact municipal levy. It's more of a straight in, straight out type of thing. So there's less revenue projected, and there's less costs associated with that as well. Most of those costs are materials and supplies that wash out in that process. Another thing that you may know when you look at the budget this year is a drop in our environmental education costs. And that is because we won't be able to run the summer day camp next year, because if we're in the process of renovating this building, there will be nowhere to operate that day camp. So we'll have to pause for a year. Staff did look at other locations, but they weren't cost feasible to do that. One thing that I'll note, because it comes up either here or at municipal council offices, is in some of the budget line items, there's an item that's just called other. Under conservation lands, other is property tax. Same with under flood forecasting, or not flood forecasting, flood control structures. There is a small amount to other, that is property tax. And under the administration budget, other represents insurance costs and our levy to Conservation Ontario. So as noted, we did cut out a position in planning, not a position that was filled, but a position that was pending, and we didn't hire it this year. I did put an option in the staff report to add that back in. As I said, there is no shortage of work for staff within the environmental planning department, but we're making that decision to pull back simply because we're not realizing the numbers from. Otherwise, the operating budget and the capital budget are laid out for the board. The proposed levy increase across the two is about 5.37% just over $92,000 for the year spread across 8 municipalities. That percentage doesn't play out equally across all municipalities. It changes based on how the assessed value changes within each municipality year over year. And I would note that the assessed value has gone up over 2.6% in. So through you, Madam Chair, I welcome any questions or discussion.
Great, thank you for that. Member Farmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, just seeking some clarification for the environmental planning position in the difficulty in reaching 100% cost recovery. Are we seeing that as a result of where the fees are set and where the fees are frozen, or is that a lesser volume of work than that original report forecasted?
The fee freeze doesn't help. The fee freeze over the last 2 years has, it would have been inflationary increases to the fee schedule that are being lost. There has been a drop in total number of applications in 2024 versus 2023, but in 2023, we were also coming up shy on this. I think to best guess as to what the challenge is there's different applications than we would have had, and we also have applications that linger. So if a plan of subdivision goes in, we get paid for that in 1 year. But then the review of that plan of subdivision could go on for several years. We don't always have an opportunity to go back to the developer and say, we actually need more money to keep doing this review. There's built-ins in our fee schedule that say when we can do that. So typically it's approved, it's draft approved, and it gets a red line revision, and we have to come back to it. So a lot of work is driven by that. A lot of work is driven by compliance issues. So there's no 100% straight answer, but I guess the thing that we've noticed most over the last couple of years is that when we remove that buffer and depend solely on those user fees, it's much, much more apparent when those user fees don't add up the way anticipated.
Do you have a follow-up, Member Farmer?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Member Carlson.
Thank you. How long since that Watson report was done? Does that not go back to like 2019 before COVID hit, or?
I think we implemented it, first year we implemented it was 2023. We got it in under the wire first fee freeze.
Okay, I was thinking it went back further before that.
That question. Further discussion? Member Gray.
Just a few points for more information. One of the line items is GIS increase is a little bit more significant than a lot of other items. Can you attribute that to anything specific, Tim, or is that is this one of these things as we plan on the admin center refurbishment that we're going to incur additional costs there? What's driving that more significant increase this year?
Yeah, so what you'll actually notice is if you go to the water management flood forecasting line item at the very top, the operating budget, you'll notice a sizable decrease in that budget. So what we had is we had a staff member who was split between the two departments, and that staff member has moved on to a different opportunity, and we're rehiring, but inevitably you can't always post the job for what you had, if that makes sense to you. We happen to have a staff person that was versed in a couple of different areas, and we were able to split them across the organization that way. The person that we're looking to bring on is likely going to be more GIS IT focused. So we've moved that budget from water management into to GIS IT.
Okay, so our need is driving that. We see less need in the water management and more in the GIS, or just a little bit more background on what's changed there beyond the individual that was in the role.
Yeah, so no, the need is not gone, but in order to keep the budget, like I said, reasonable, we can't we can't repopulate that at the current time. So we're looking at a future solution to do that. And that was a technician level position. So we'll also be looking to fill in a technician level position there. And that actually plays out well in the watershed strategy that we showed, where there's a portion of a technician in this department and then a portion of a technician in water monitoring, wells. And so as we look at that from a step back holistically, we can say, okay, well, there's one person combined of all of those pieces. We do need to wait for changes in the budget structure to allow us to do that. So right now, we posted for a GIS person. In a perfect world, they would fill both needs, but we can't guarantee that because it's a pretty situation.
Okay. The second question I had was, we still have certain costs to remain for education. We're decreasing because we don't have the day camp. What is our projection on when we may be undertaking renovating the building, just in terms of timeline? It would appear roughly that while we've knocked $21,000 out of the budget by not having the day camp, that in prior years, we seem to have kind of a consistent 55,000 plus or minus 2,000-3,000 a year in terms of sales and service coming out of that department. So we're decreasing 42,000 this year. Is that all day camp? Or if the return on investment, like what, I guess part of the question is, what will those staff be doing if they're not doing day camp that would normally be resources going to operating it? So, or if we're looking at July in the timeline, is it fair to look at September and put the extra revenues back in the budget for having a day camp?
Thank you. And I'll be on Cynic Gloria in a second as well, but for that day camp, we hire staff for the summer to run the day camp. So we're not hiring those staff to run it, and the revenue that comes in that would have paid those staff is no longer going to be coming in to pay those staff. In terms of the building, we're hoping to break ground in March or April. So there was no opportunity for running the day camp out of this building here. So we looked at other opportunities, other opportunities on the property. The biggest challenge we face is extended hot weather, extended or thunderstorm risk, things like that, where we have to get the kids out of the elements and into a safer space. We won't have that.
In terms of the other things that individual will be working on, so we do have that one full-time position, is we are looking at expanding our experiential programming in the summer. So basically looking at acting as experts at other day camps and doing a fee for service for that. So they are looking on implementing an education framework and that type of thing.
Okay. It's tough to lose. It's one of those things, you lose it for a year, you never know what your return is going to be. I presume it'd likely be 100% and things would be great, but you do never know when you lose a service that you put out there. And I guess we don't have the community center at Harrison Park doesn't come without a cost, so I get that. And I see a hand just went up there, so you've probably already looked into it.
So we did look into it. They've increased the cost of the Harrison Park centers significantly. And they flat out said no when we reached out to them, because they have 3 other camps running from there. We have looked into some other locations where it's accepted. And it is a decision we don't take lightly.
Yeah. Okay. The back to the kind of you're talking about the Watson's report. So over the years, I know our sales and services in 20 were 1.13 million, 22, 1.09 million, 21, 1.07. Then it jumped in 23. So you're absolutely spot on, 1.663 million. For sales and service, the 2 questions are we've had the planning discussion. Can you elaborate on the revenues that are coming from the conservation land, so parking, etc., and the cost relationship to that, and what we're putting into reserves or put back into the properties? Because we still have some capital items that are in the budget that are funded from levy. But what is that additional funds that we're creating in revenues or self revenues above our costs on the properties?
Thank you. So most of that answer can be found right in the conservation lands operations portion of the budget on page 4 of the budget, or page 116 of the broader PDF document. So you'll see the municipal levy cost in that department, and you'll see the sales and services in that department. So the sales and services is the parking revenues. So as you can see, parking revenues are paying for, I don't know what that percentage is, but it's called 60% of that department, 60% plus. And you can see on the expenses side where that's going. So $35,000 of that is proposed to go to reserves in 2025. Also, the one thing that we did pull out of this costing, and it shows up in the communications budget, is $8,500 to reprint the Explorer Guide, which has been very, very successful. But after 3 years, we are running out of them. And so it's time to reprint them again. They're not cheap to print. And so since they drive people to the properties, it made sense to use the revenue from the properties to pay for it. So largely that's what you're seeing. That reserve fund for conservation lands comes to the board twice. It has been board twice this year to see what those reserves look like. And in 2025, as you've noted, we're pulling some money from those reserves to do capital projects, and we're pulling some money from the municipal levy to do capital projects. We have not increased the levy going into capital. We've actually decreased it in 2025. We don't like to do that because it puts us further off the mark of maintaining a 10-year steady revenue stream into capital to make sure that we're meeting our capital needs. But we wanted to be able to drive that total levy increase a little bit lower. So anything that you see shown there as reserves or sales and service on the capital side under conservation lands is coming out of revenue that's been generated.
So if I could just ask kind of one further question of clarity. Let's say we're budgeting 276,000 in revenues. Is there an approximation to the cost of summer staff or like ambassadors, for instance, to support that revenue?
Yeah,
like we have our own internal senior staff, the full-time staff, but what is that complement dollar-wise? That's what.
Yeah, the staff cost is about $80,000 to run the parking program. So that number, put it up 8,500 from there. So we're seeing almost 285 in parking revenues. Take about 80,000 out of that to run that program, not including permanent staff, and leaves us with a net revenue of over $200,000. So now that over $200,000 is category 3 programming that's offsetting category 1 mandatory program, as is obvious here. So we're seeing an increase in levy within this department. That's the first notable increase in this department in 5 years for levy. And it's still less than where this department sat in 2019.
Okay.
Member Gray, any follow-up?
No, that's good enough.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Member Shaw?
Thank you. I want to go back to the fee freeze. I'm assuming that we're assuming this is going to continue. And curious what conversations you've had in Conservation Ontario and like what work is being done to try and change the minister's mind on this decision.
Thank you. Yeah, so it is very important. So Vice Chair Dubik and I met with MVP buyers back in the late winter, early spring of this year to discuss exactly this issue with him and pointed out a couple of things to it. One being that our fee is not very expensive when you compare to the costs and revenues associated with developing a subdivision. So even if we were charging $20,000 across the project and you're putting in a 100-lot subdivision, it's a drop in the bucket. But what the fee-free does do is it reduces our ability across all conservation authorities to provide good, quick service. So not to say that our staff aren't providing that, but it impinges our ability to do it. And the problem with that is if you're a developer, it's much, much more cost. The time is essentially worth a lot more than the small fee that we charge. So even just the interest and holding the loans that they would have is going to be substantially more. So we had that discussion. So the two big things there is one, if we have more resources coming into the organization, we can provide better service faster. And again, that's not a knock on the work that our staff or any conservation authority staff do right now. It's just the same as your own municipal staff. They are stretched to meet timelines and to deal with the level of development that there is. So at a broader level, Conservation Ontario has been meeting with, I believe, with Minister Smith, Minister of M&R, to discuss this. And there are a couple of options that are being discussed. So one is just get rid of the fee freeze everywhere. But assuming that that's not likely to happen, the next thing is, can we at least build COLA into it? So, okay, yes, you're going to freeze it. And so nobody's going to jump up 50% in their fees, but let's build in COLA so that it doesn't start falling further and further behind and then lead to inevitably a bigger jump. My add-on to that we brought forward to MPP buyers is if the government can't commit to either of those things, at least tell us in September or August so we're not finding it in December. So the first year we found it, I think it was 6 p.m. December 29th. Nobody's working at that time. And so that was really unfortunate, but we suspected it was coming, so we were prepared for it. Last year, I think we found it on December 15th or so. So from a budgeting perspective, still an irrelevant time frame. Obviously, we haven't heard yet, so those discussions are still ongoing. I can only hope that Conservation Ontario is successful in getting COLA built in. And so we have not factored any change to our fees into this budget because we don't think it would be responsible to do so.
Member Sean, follow on.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Member Carlton.
Just a question, is the province so late coming up with that in December because their year end is March 31st and they don't recognize that municipal governments are at a different year end?
I wondered if that's the case. I don't know.
It's a good reminder.
They think they're giving 3 months notice.
Any other questions? Member Greg.
I do just have a small question then too. When we're doing the property booklets again, is there a budget consideration for like sponsorship that you're looking to get from businesses to support that? You mentioned it's a significant cost to print 8,500, but it's a really, really good book. And there's a lot of value to, I think you've got a product that, has a certain amount of value in the community to sell.
And yeah, the short answer is we're investigating that. And so the good thing is the way that we've chosen to fund it is we've put the full cost in there, but we've put the cost in there from a source that would go to reserves if it weren't going to the booklet. So if we're able to offset the costs through sponsorships or advertisements, essentially, then that would be great. And it would allow us to put money into our capital reserves for lands and less into.
Follow up?
No,
Member? Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, so thank you very much for presenting that budget.
If I could Well, there's something I forgot to mention. So I did mention that we have not built the building cost into the capital right now because we don't fully know what those are, and the board has not, although the board's given direction to carry on with construction drawings, the board has not technically given approval to actually move forward. So as I mentioned, I'll be going out to your municipal councils mostly throughout the month of November. All of your clerks have been kind enough to give me back-to-back delegations to talk about the budget and then to talk about the building. I have sent information after our last board meeting out to all your CAOs and clerks to say this is what we anticipate the cost to be. We would appreciate you please building this into your budget so that it's not something that has to be added on as a surprise when we get to that point. But what I would like direction from the board on is when do you want me to factor that in? Because if we're going to levy for it, it does have to be part of the budget.
Okay, so the floor is open for suggestions. Member Farmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, just could we get some more clarification? What are the options when you say hearing the question as when do we factor that in? I might not yet be totally familiar with what the different options would be for when we do that, or at what point in the process.
That, and maybe I'll go to Member Mackey as well. Member Mackey?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I would recommend that we insert those as soon as possible. Most municipalities are starting into budget talks typically in November, December, people budget meetings set up, so the sooner we get that, the better. Might as well keep all the good news coming.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a response of just the sooner the better.
Started September 27th.
Any other maybe comments to that? Jeff.
Thank you. So to your comment, Member Farmer, there is no necessarily proper way to stage it. What we wanted to do is we didn't want to plug it into the capital budget at the outset because we wanted to give a more raw view what the budget looks like, just to operate on the same ongoing annual basis. This is what it looks like, and this is what it. Obviously, when we plug the building into the capital budget, it's going to jack up that percentage substantially, and we didn't want that to skew the discussions on the rest of the budget. But like I said, we still plan to talk to your councils about both the regular budget and this. So what we can do is after having those discussions, we can come back in November with that number plugged into the budget. Understanding that it could change next year when we're long, but we have a very good understanding where it should be. From there, the board at the November meeting could choose to approve it or could choose to take time to consider it, to talk more, consult more, and bring it back for final approval. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to come to you with this plugged in and it looks like a giant percentage and now we're trying to scrape back operating to make up.
Member Carlton.
Is the expectation that the building cost is going to start on the tax levy in 2025, that throughout 2025, we're going to be paying towards that then?
Yes. Yeah, and so I know it shouldn't come as any surprise to your treasurers, your financial staff, or your CAOs, because we've already put that number out to them and put the offer to discuss with them. So I've met with some of your senior municipal staff second time about this, and some are still forthcoming. But certainly after we talk to councils, after the dialogue will be good.
And maybe just as a clarification, is it a 1 year or 2 year to the budget?
Should be 15 years.
Sorry, 15. Oh, that's right. It's only 15 years. That one, that's right. Any further discussion on this? Right, so we'll move over to the motion. So I'll read this out. Whereas the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority staff have prepared the 2025 draft budget for the Board of Directors consideration. And whereas the Conservation Authorities Act requires that this draft budget be circulated to participating municipalities for a minimum 30-day commenting period, that the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors receive the 2025 draft budget, and that staff be directed to distribute the 2025 draft budget and budget companion to participating municipalities for the minimum 30-day review period, and that staff bring a report before the Board of Directors at the November 2024 meeting of the board, period. We don't need that little last few words there. May I have a mover? Member Mackey and Member Bell. Any last comments? Okay, we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? And that is carried. Right, so we are moving along to item D, the personnel policy final report. And who will be speaking to this one? Allison, will you be speaking to this one? Yes. Great, thank you. And maybe just as a reminder that if we do want to get into a more of a deep dive conversation on this regarding employee recognition, negotiation items, we may want to bring it into closed. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is a kind of a repeat from the last board meeting. You had requested that we have another look at what our municipalities were doing, and you had requested some change wording to some of the special leaves. So I have some costing into this report, what some of the changes will, what some of the changes are and what the cost will be. Excuse me. One of the bigger ones was the increased number of wellness days as opposed to the 8 sick days currently carried forward each year if we didn't use. What we're suggesting in our personnel policy is 12 days, and the costing one additional day, if everybody were to take it, would be about $8,000. It is expected that everybody would take one extra day. Little. The bereavement leave wording, that is section 14. Section 14.1, personnel policy. And the direction from the board was that we would investigate alternative wording for the definition of family under the bereavement leave policy. The following wording that we found from the Alberta Employment Standards Act, bereavement leave can be taken after the death of an immediate or extended family member, including a person the employee isn't related to, but considers to be like a close relative. Our draft policy currently says that permanent and long-term contract employees who would otherwise have been at work shall be permitted up to 3 days leave of absence with pay in the event of a death of a spouse, common law spouse, mother, father, mother-in-law, etc. And what we're proposing that we change this to is that we add non-related individuals fulfilling the role of an immediate family member be added, so that will ensure the policy is more inclusive. And based on what we discovered when we were looking at our municipal partners policy, we've added the 2 additional days paid leave of absence for the death of a spouse, common law spouse, child, or stepchild. The financial budget implications of the changes that we have made in our personnel policy in total would add approximately $3,400 in costs and would save approximately $7,500 in costs. So this does not include the additional bereavement day. So we would be looking at savings rather than additional costs. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you for those updates, Alison. Member Farmer.
Thank you. Just seeking some clarification from staff around how pregnancy or infant loss would be included either in the bereavement policy or any of the other policies there. Not something people want to think about, but also kind of a gray zone where not everyone, like under the employment insurance benefits, a pregnant person is eligible for maternity benefits if a pregnancy ends after 20 weeks. If you're not the childbearing parent, you don't qualify for parental leaves, but it can still make work an untenable thing for a period of time. So just wondering how that fits in under the revised strategy.
Thank you for that question, Alison.
Okay, we haven't really looked at changing that over what we have in our current personnel policy. And we don't indicate in that personnel policy when the child becomes the child, I guess. So it would have to be based on what the Employment Standards Act says is a live birth versus a non-live birth. So might have to do a little more research on that.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit more work maybe is needed just to kind of dig into that, but anything as a follow-up, Member Farmer?
No, I think like as an issue, generally pregnancy and infant loss is not widely spoken about and consequently not like widely brought into policies, but it's common and has an impact. And I imagine too that the extension to 12 wellness days, as well as vacation, that like there are a variety of adjacent policies or aspects of this policy that could support folks. But I appreciate the feedback there. I don't know if that's something that would mean that this policy is not ready to be adopted at the moment, but I would want the organization to be thinking about that, the potential impact on staff.
Thank you for that comment. And it is definitely part of the, as we continue to evolve with inclusivity and different situations. Thank you for those comments. Member Mackey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Alison. I guess a couple things. The bereavement policy, adding a line like that to me just creates a tremendous amount of gray area. I mean, I don't know how a manager makes that determination on someone fulfilling the role of an immediate family member. I don't know that any municipal lower tier that has wording in there like that right now. I agree with the 2 extra days for a spouse and for a child. That makes complete sense. But I don't know how you would manage terminology like that if you were a manager. It would be the interpretation of the individual then, and not the corporation who determine that. And I just think it really opens ourselves up. If you had to go to Alberta to find it, then that's questionable for me too, when we don't have it in our current policies locally. So anyway, that's around bereavement. The wellness days, I completely support the wellness days. I guess I question, it's a jump from 8 to 12. I'm not sure. I think 10 is on the high side for most municipalities that I'm aware of. So I'm not sure why we need to jump from 8 to 12, I guess, but I like the concept of wellness days. My only other comment on the whole package is the cost of living being set at a minimum of 1%, even if there was no cost of living. I guess I'd like some justification or rationalization of that. So like if the cost of living went down in inflationary times, we'd still be given 1%. Why would we do that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for those questions. Allison?
Well, I guess it would be in order to ensure that we're not taking anything away. And even in times when there's no inflation, there's still, costs still increase. The cost of benefits goes up every year, for example.
One of the things we noticed when going through the municipal policies is some of the policies that we received were silent on this. A lot of them tied it to similar to what we've tied it to CPI. In the town of Green Mountains policies that they have posted, they tied it to CPI, but then they put a lower and upper upset limit on those. So you could never be less than I think it was 1.5%. You could never be less than, you could never be more than 3 or 3.5% as upset limits. And I think, I presume it was to keep it from an upper upset limit might not be unreasonable. If you think of the years that we just came through where we had CPI at 7%. For the organization to manage.
Yeah, Mr. Member Mackey.
These aren't merit increases. We build merit increases into our pay grids. This is cost of living. And if someone's cost of living goes up 5%, then our policy is speaking to that. But if the cost of living goes down, I'm not saying we ever cut back on it, but if the cost of living was 0%, I don't know why we would go up 1%. If we're sticking to this policy and giving cost of living on every other year based on July or August. Just a couple thoughts.
Thank you for that. Member Carlton?
So my thought on that would be that most employees are on a step process. So any employee who has reached step 5 is now not moving up and they're now flatlined. If they're not getting that, at least a 1% increase each year, they're flatlined until we do a reevaluation of wages again. That's the raised end that they're gonna get that year. Makes sense?
Not in my mind.
But if you're the
Not-
highest step in your salary grid and you can't go any higher, you're now flatlined there until we do a reevaluation, which could mean employees are falling behind on their pay scale. And if we go out 2 or 3 years before we do a new evaluation, suddenly we've got a huge increase in payroll cost for a year. Because we've got to bring everybody into line with where they should be. So it's easier to get that 1% per year.
Member Bell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whenever we talk about things like this, percentiles of people, the only thing I personally fall back on is attracting and retaining personnel. And it's huge. And if it's a starting point or if it's something at 1%, and as our economy and as our dynamics of living here in Ontario change, I think by having something stated in there, that can tell either potential people, this is what this organization has, and for those that are current employees and give of themselves to this organization, it's also a reflection that, in this case, we, the board of directors, support this time. And just on that, I'm very comfortable with the terminology of 1%. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this point? Member Mackey?
Well, I guess in response to Tim's comment in regards to Blue Mountain, we haven't added to our policy anything about an upside cap on CPI. It's part of Blue Mountain's justification for the 1% is to have a cap on the upside, and you have 8% CPI, they're capping it at 3.5, then the board may want to consider putting a cap in of what CPI could be as protection for the ratepayers.
So thank you for that comment, Member Farmer.
I'd like to respond to Member Mackey's comments on the bereavement policy and the opening up of that language. Having not had a chance to speak to it at the last meeting, it strikes me that the issue we're imagining protecting against is one of mistrust and of abuse of the policy. And from my perspective, if we don't trust our employees to begin with, if that relationship between management and staff is such that all 8 of my grandmothers died in 1 year, then and we're projecting something that might not be believable, that we have other issues, and that if we're coming from the place of believing that the organization is aspiring to open and honest relationships between staff and management, and that we also want to create an environment where people who might not have a stereotypical leave it to beaver family structure are also afforded the same rights and supports as someone who does, then I'm very much in support of that expanded language. And I think that we can be guided by that desire to have a supportive working environment, and also not necessarily trust that we can't do something until everyone else is doing it, because I don't think that puts us in a place of actual agency. I think that just means that we're reactive to where everyone else's policies are at, rather than imagining the kind of environment that we as a board want to create for the staff at the organization.
Thank you for those comments. So I think the one point that's still being discussed as well is the inflation cap, the index cap. Is there further discussion on that point? Member Gray?
Well, my only comments are, I think it would have been easy to leave it out. And you just respond to it when the need is there. I've always had concerns with everything being percentage based, because a 1% and $100,000 salary over a $50,000 salary, you are continually increasing that wage disparity gap that exists in society. So fundamentally, I have a problem with everything being percentage based and being applied across the board and never being reevaluated. And I think that then you just lock yourself into inflexible policy, which I'm always against. I just see that part's unnecessary. I think in the last meeting, we had a discussion, we asked staff to go and consult with municipal neighbors on the bereavement language. The report is very clear in the response that came back that none of our other municipalities consulted have that language in there. I'm not in favor of it. I don't think it's necessary. The increase in wellness days does respond to the item if it ever was to appear. And I think of someone very close to me who is from a very small family, tragically lost close family friends in a car crash, and she would have loved to have went to that funeral, but she had to work, and sometimes that's what occurs too. But if you do want to go, the wellness days, if they're there for you, provide that opportunity. I think when you incorporate subjectivity now into your policy, like Member Mackey was saying, you make it very difficult. And I totally understand with Councillor Farmer, you're always believing in your employees. But that said, you are inviting trouble when you incorporate subjective perspectives or decision-making into that process. And I think that's all that's being achieved there is opening the door of subjectivity. And it's not so much that we have mistrust or you are concerned about people. It's just, you've now made it very difficult to assess, once you incorporate that language in there. So, I'm not in favor of that. I think the responses in the paragraph there, we consulted with other municipalities. We found out what they have, and I would like to mirror that language.
Okay, thank you for that. Discussion? Member Day?
I appreciate your point, Member Greg, about the lower income salaries not benefiting as much from a 1% increase, and would love to know if there are, I guess, I kind of ironically, if there are ways that other municipalities or governments cope with that, and instead of just doing a quote percentage increase. So that's something, that's a new idea one that I'd like to mull over and see how it can work in a practical sense within the nation. I do appreciate the ease of listing relatives. And my opinion remains the same, that the folks who are blessed with strong families and who have relationship with their family, that is good that they can spend that time with their families when people are in need. But it's operating from an assumption that all families work that way, and not everyone is in contact with their family or has a family, a biological family. So I don't know what, I think this is a solution of working in the direction of inclusivity and ensuring that everyone I think I've spoke to this a lot at our class meeting, so I'm pretty sure what I intend to say, and I'll leave it.
Okay, thank you, Member Day. Member Farmer? Oh, your hand is raised.
That's a holdover. I did not put that down. My apologies.
All good, thank you. Member Carlton?
I would agree with Member Day. I think if we come at it from the perspective of everybody has a family with two parents and brothers and sisters, and we work it around that, we don't allow for the person that doesn't have that. So I totally agree with what Tobin is saying.
Thank you for that comment. Member Shaw?
Yeah, I guess my question was gonna be, have we, like, there must be some best practice coming out of HR, consultants and HR companies around this. I feel like we're probably not we might be the first to try and address it in this area, but we can't be the first trying to address it. I don't know if do we have HR resources that we tap into from time to time, that could provide some guidance around, like, what is, there's the policy, but then, like, I hear the concerns around, like, how do you practically manage that in the workplace, right? And there is, is there any resources that we could get some further, for you as staff too, just further support on, like, what does that look like? And how does that work?
Allison, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I could look into it. I'm just not sure exactly where. I know that the organization that did our last salary review does offer HR services, so that might be one resource that we could look into. We also had a program called HR Downloads a few years ago that we used for some training. We may be able to approach that resource as well. So maybe a suggestion that we can try.
Member Mackey?
Well, most of our municipalities have HR resources and are reviewing, the CEOs are reviewing the policies on a regular basis. And they've not delved into this at all. The only thing we're looking at around bereavement is some of the terminology that refers to funerals, because, typical funerals are not taking place at celebrations of life at a later date. Some policies don't always speak to, going to a celebration of life, 2 months after the fact. So some of that wording needs to get changed in some bereavement policies, but like I said, Muslims do have the 5 days for spouses and children. So it's not that HR is not.
Thank you. Any further comments on? Member Carlton?
So I have one, but it's about bereavement within the earned days off schedule. And it's page 29 of that report, 162 of the full package. And it says, if an employee is on bereavement leave on their regularly scheduled ERO, there is no provision to take another day off in lieu. So is that telling me that somebody who's got work forward has an earned day off coming, if their bereavement lands on that, they then just lose a day? Is that how that's reading?
I think so.
So if they're normally entitled to 3 days bereavement leave, but they've put their time in to earn that earned day off, I think we're shorting them a day.
We can look into that. We took these, Credit Valley Conservation had this spelled out as to how it would interact with other days off. So we took that from there. We could look at that.
I guess my concern there would be, we're talking bereavement. We're talking a time when it's a very difficult time period for most people. I would hate to take a day away from them because I think it's a really important time for people to have the time off to get through. So for them to lose a day that they're entitled to, that would really concern me.
Thank you for those comments. Any further discussion? So we don't have a motion yet. Okay.
I was just gonna say, before we go to the motion, there's a couple of different dialogues going on here with the board that will make it challenging for staff to actually get this policy approved. Because it may not be that the policy document in its entirety is the issue, but there's 1 or 2 policy items that board members have differing opinions on. So I'm wondering if there's a mechanism for us to get this policy document approved, and whether it is, whether there has to be a separate motion to go one way or another on particular policies of interest to a member. So if it's the bereavement language, if the board is able to vote one way or the other on that, as a separate standalone motion, so that we can get the whole document through, because otherwise what I envision is that staff will keep coming back every month with a revised version of this document, and the whole document can't get approved because it's being hung up on 1 or 2 things. So if the board can agree to look at that, there's we can do that. If there's something that the board would like to come back, for staff to come back with, I wonder if we can get the greater policy approved and have the one section grayed out to be voted on, or something along those lines. The intent is for this policy to start January 1, so there is still time for the board to look at it again in November. But if 95% of the policy is absolutely acceptable to the board, then I'm wondering if we can just get that through and deal with the other pieces.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Member Farmer?
Thank you through the chair. If it would work procedurally, I'd be prepared to move the recommendation, save and accept the sections pertaining to our debate today, including cost of living and bereavement leave, to put that on the floor right now, and then we can have subsequent motions immediately if we're ready for that. But if that language works procedurally, I'd be happy to move that.
So thank you. So then we would put the motion as written. on the floor. And then we'll tack on maybe an amendment to that, or should we just amend the main motion or the motion that we see in front of us?
My intention there would be to have the motion as written with the addition of, as detailed in the attached document, save and accept the cost of living increases and sections pertaining to cost of living increases and bereavement leave.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then maybe I'll just read it out. So whereas Gray Sauble Conservation Authority's personnel policy has not had substantive review and change for over 20 years, and whereas management deems that it is necessary to update the policy to better reflect our organizational needs, that the Gray Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors endorses the updated Gray Sauble Conservation Authority personnel policy as detailed in the attached document, with the exception of the bereavement and cost of living sections. And Member Shaw will second that. Any final words? Okay, we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Hey, thank you very much for that, and thank you, Allison.
Through the chair, does staff need additional time for additional research on the bereavement policy, or would it, did I gather that from the intention that more information will come back, or would it be appropriate to move that motion now as well?
So I think the understanding is staff will come back with more information, and if timing does allow, it would be in November. Is that sort of the intent? We'll look to Tim and Allison.
What I would recommend is that the board have an opportunity to vote up or down those items now. Suggest that the board supports or any of either of them, then it can just roll forward and then not. Because otherwise we don't know what we're achieving.
Very perfect. Okay, so let's do that. Member Farmer.
I'd like to move that the GSCA Board of Directors endorses the GSCA personnel policy as detailed in the attached document pertaining to bereavement leave, as written.
Member Carlton.
But we have a couple of questions about wording. So I think we'd like that wording to come back.
Maybe just a point of clarity here with the bereavement piece, maybe that's the piece that comes back to board in November, because I think there were a few outstanding questions to that. Was that the intent? Member Day.
For me, the outstanding question might be pregnancy or infant law. As something that was new to this conversation, as opposed to that would be the piece for me that I would like, that I'm not sure what would happen if we move forward with pressing it. Sorry.
Okay, so thank you for that, Member Carlton.
And I would like that piece around the earned days off and bereavement to be sure that we're not cutting staff of one day there.
Okay, so thank you, and Member Shaw, I think you also had sort of the third question about the implementation. Maybe if there was any other context around that.
Yeah, I guess it was really more like, yeah, how does that work? What does the HR industry say today around like how you actually implement that?
Does that provide clarity for staff?
So for that's for the bereavement piece. I think it does for the bereavement. So
then the bereavement piece will be coming, just for our clarity, then the bereavement piece will be coming back to the board at the next meeting, because there's a few outstanding questions.
So what we can do with the bereavement piece, we can definitely bring that back into the board as the opportunity to vote on that one way or the other. For the COLA piece, if a member is willing to move it, there's the opportunity to move that one right now or not, and then get direction to come back if it's not carried.
Okay, thank you. So is there a motion that a member wishes to put forward on COLA. So we were talking about caps and Member Mackey?
Thanks, Madam Chair. If, Tim, do you have the wording? I mean, we were using the wording from Blue Mountains for the 1%. Do you have the wording from Blue Mountains as to what the upside limit was?
We weren't using their wording, but we just gave it just.
We were picking,
Yeah, I can.
cherry picking some of the stuff. I think it is important to have an upside limit if we're using the term CPI as of July, August. It's always at the board's discretion, irregardless of the policy, looking at a budget. But if you create a policy that you'd like to try to follow, you come in at 8% CPI. One to swallow for a council or board.
I was a little
Still
surprised.
fall behind.
I was a little surprised it said we follow the Grant County because I don't think what we've done in practice the last year or two, right?
We've done that every year except last year where we brought a specific motion to the board,
Okay.
but it's cumbersome.
So Tim's just taking a look.
I mean, historically, it's kind of, you know, there's not a lot of years that you don't have, you know, at least a 1 or, you know, 1.5% increase. But there are times where you go through tough economic times and you're actually going backwards. And the economy is maybe leaning that way right now.
And so the specific wording, is cost of living adjustment, COLA. Cost of living adjustment may be applied subject to council's approval through the budget process. The COLA increase will be considered annually and within the following range of low and high increase limits based on the Canadian Consumer Price Index CPI as reported in July. COLA increase is no less than 1.5% if the CPI is less than 1.5%. COLA increase of no more than 3% if the July CPI is more than 3%.
But it does say at council's discretion, so that can change.
Yeah. And so we put out there salaries at Grace Sauble and salaries at the town are not comparable salaries.
Member Mackey, are you wanting to put something on the floor or are we still considering?
I mean, I like some, I mean, the 1%, I mean, I would say the minimum 1% and up to a maximum of 4% at the discretion of the board.
Okay, so we have a motion,
Second that.
and it's seconded by Member Carlton. Any other discussion?
So through the chair, would you just mind clarifying that number? Was that 4%?
Yes, so the cap would be 4%, and we would, it would still be at the discretion of the board, as we do review the budget every year. And Member Greg, did you have a comment?
I was going to make a comment and I just flipped my PDF to the bottom and I'm quickly scrolling back to section 6.5 to find that spot. I think that's where it was. Take another question if someone has it.
Okay, any other comments?
Yes.
I think you're the last one.
0.5. Well, Member Mackey beat me to it. I was just going to move that we revert back to the existing language and that we not have a floor or a ceiling in it. I think it's up to the board. Every time we have a budget, and I didn't see a requirement, I'm as bothered by having a ceiling as I am having a floor. So my preference would have been to discard that exact language in its entirety.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor. So why don't we just first vote on that motion and see how it goes? So that was for a floor of 1% and a ceiling of 4%. So those in favor? 1, 2, and number 5. Are you in favor of the motion? No, you're not. Okay. Okay, thank you. Those opposed? Okay, so that is lost. So is there another motion? Member Greg?
I'll move that staff incorporate the existing language on CPI or cost of living as it exists with the removal of that 1% specific floor language.
Okay, so as is with the removal of 1%. That's the seconder. Member Mackey? Thank you. Any further discussion? Member Shaw?
So I'm reading, I've got 6.5 in front of me. Do we need the language added in here at the board's discretion or something to that effect that was previously referenced? Because that would strictly be keeping it at CPI, correct? That's what's being proposed.
I'm looking at sentence 2 and just interpreting that as that's kind of the current means of calculating the budget that comes to the board for consideration, but I would defer to Tim on exactly how you currently do that. But my memory is, yeah, you're using existing comparators, or in most cases, the county, in terms of building that base budget draft that comes to the.
So every year up to last year, we used Gray counties. We got their number from them. Last year, based on discussion with the board, you'll remember we put different options before the board, and the board voted on. And this year, we've based it on this policy with the assumption that this policy will be in place before the budget is approved. So using CPI from July.
Member Greg?
I guess the only question I would ask, nobody asked what CPI consideration was today when we were having the discussion on the budget, so I'd be surprised if any board member knew what's incorporated into that draft.
What? It's 2.5.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That was July of the CPI.
Yeah, I think that was in there, I think. I think I read that.
Okay. So I missed it.
But maybe I'm reading something else.
I didn't read it in there, but I looked it up.
That's what it, yeah. It was,
2.5.
Okay, and so just as a reminder, so we're talking about the motion of leaving the wording as is and removing the 1% for. Okay, so let's take that to Member Carlton.
Since this is always at the board's discretion, do we need to change it? It's simply a guideline. Leave it as it is. We don't need to change that.
Member Gray, is your motion. Why don't we just, so there is a motion, it's been moved and seconded, so let's take a vote on that. Those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, so that is lost. So Member Carlton, would you like to put that motion on the floor then?
My motion would be that we just leave it exactly as it is there because it's always at the board's discretion, so just leave it be.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Member Bell, any further discussion? Okay, let's take that for a vote. Those in favor? And that is passed. Yay. Fantastic. Okay, so that concludes our personnel policy item. So why don't we take a 10-minute break? And then we'll be back at 3:10.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Where's it belong?
My gosh. So really?
I just think it's gonna come.
Whatever's here.
I demonstrated that. The wheels just running.
Okay, folks, so we are at 3:12, so we will be getting back into the meeting. And so are we live now?
Yeah.
Okay, and we are live. Okay, and we'll just be, and John will be joining us virtually. Welcome back, Member Farmer. Okay, so we are, our next motion, so item E is that the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors approve the cancellation of the December 18, 2024 Board of Directors meeting. So this is something that we did talk about at our last meeting. May I have a mover? Member Shaw and a seconder, Member Carlton. Any discussion? I see none, so we'll take the, oh,
Sorry,
Member
can I
Shaw?
just confirm we are booked for the lunch then, earlier in December, that is for sure.
so,
Allison's at the meeting, but.
okay, so yes, we are booked and a meeting invite has already been.
No, I will send it out.
It will be sent. Thank you for that. Okay, so we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Thank you. Moving along to our next motion, that the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors set January 22, 2025 as the date of the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority Annual General Meeting. A mover, Member Mackey, and a seconder, Member Bell. Any discussion on that? Member Shaw?
So this is right after Roma. Is everyone aware of that?
So is this the day after?
Yeah.
Okay, the day after.
Yeah, I believe so.
And usually Roma is half a day on the last day, is that correct? The conference, so you do have travel time? Okay,
Yeah, Roma's over at noon on the Tuesday, and this will be Wednesday afternoon.
okay. Any further discussion?
So don't abuse yourself on Tuesday night.
No, it should be by Tuesday night, it's Monday night.
Everybody will be home Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take,
Yeah.
sorry, Member Bell?
Well, we're just trying to vote.
Okay, let's vote. Okay, those in favor? Okay, thank you. That is carried, thank you. Now moving along to our next item is the conservation lands strategy draft. And will we be hearing from Margaret?
Yes.
Welcome, Margaret.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the board. So the conservation authority or the conservation area, I keep saying conservation authority because it just rolls off the tongue. But the conservation area strategy is a requirement of the Conservation Authorities Act and associated regulations to be completed by the end of the year, similar to the watershed-based resource management strategy presented earlier. The key difference in application is that the conservation area strategy applies specifically to lands owned and controlled by the Conservation Authority. And while the regulation necessitating the strategy was implemented in 2021, as you know, conservation authorities, including this one, have been managing lands across Ontario for decades. To that end, Grace Sauble Conservation Authority has already completed a number of policies and guidelines for land management decision-making, supported by a robust GIS data system. In considering the requirements of the province then for a conservation area strategy, we found that much of the groundwork was already in place with existing tools such as the strategic plan, the acquisition and disposition policy, risk management guidelines, the inventory of programs and services, and recent management plans. But this strategy requirement did encourage us to reflect more holistically on how those tools can and should work together going forward. So specific to land management, the draft conservation area strategy builds on that framework and proposes that land management objectives for all lands should follow the example recently set by the Ingles Falls and Eugenia Falls conservation area management plans, which support both the strategic plan and the Niagara's government parks and open space system objectives. That the classifications required by the province to be included align with the risk management guidelines to best achieve land management objectives, that GSCA lands do augment natural heritage and provide connectivity with other publicly accessible lands, that the strategy objectives primarily be implemented through management plans as they are completed for individual properties, and that the strategy be reviewed regularly within 1 year of any new strategic plan. So today we're seeking direction to share the draft as outlined in the staff report so that the strategy can be finalized before the end of the year. Questions?
Thank you for that discussion. Member Shaw?
Thank you. So I guess one question I had with this, after seeing the watershed strategy, was I was expecting to see some more like assessment of costs. But I'm assuming then those specific details will go into individual land management plans like the Eugenia Falls and the Eagles Falls plans. That's where that level of detail is going to live. Is that right?
Yes, through the chair. Yes, so the way that we looked at this is that this sets the objectives. So we used very similar objectives in those last two management plans, and that went through a public consultation process of its own, both of those. And they meet the objectives of the strat plan and the NEPA. So those would be what we consider as we look forward towards every new management plan, but the specific action items and goals for a specific property would be in the management, rather than us trying to look at 200 properties now through this one document.
Thankfully, the province not asking us to do that
Anymore.
all of them.
Great, thank you. Member Greg?
Just a comment or question there. You mentioned costs being recognized in the management plans. We've, in the past with the management plans, like we've put capital projected items in there, but we've never actually drilled right down into the operational cost. Were you asking like, what does it cost the authority to operate Eugenia Falls, for example, like annually? Because I'm not aware we've ever actually drilled down like that.
No, I was thinking more like long-term maintaining.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any follow-up on that? Okay. Any other questions, comments? Member Day?
I do have a very meeting heavy day, so I apologize if this question isn't appropriate for this moment in the agenda. I remember working in outdoor education in 2004 when Tyler Cooper passed away. He was a technical hiking in the Royal Botanical Garden, and he died due to a tree fall. And after that, there was an inquest in 2005 that looked at tree maintenance in places where people are active. So I just wanted to, memories can be, with staff turnover, sometimes information can get lost. And with emerald ash borer having an impact in our area now, so we look at some of our trails, I'm sure some of the trails on Conservation Authority property are also maintained by the Bruce Trail. And I'm wondering about the capacity of the Bruce Trail Conservancy to look at trees on properties that we own and any oversights that we should be taking to ensure the Bruce Trails sections are well maintained and and that ties in with the previous comments about hiring arborists as well. So it's just risk management and liability. I'm not sure who best to direct the question.
Would like to take that question.
I can do that. Yeah, so this particular strategy is much more high level. So it's not intended to get down to the operating level. But when we look at that, we are starting to have discussions with BTC, Bruce Trail Conservancy, to see where those opportunities lie in terms of co-management of those types of hazards on the trails. But otherwise, from Gray Sauble's perspective, we are currently under-resourced to deal with the ash issue because of EAB. And that's one of the things that was identified in the watershed strategy, is that under-resourcing and what it anticipated cost could be. One of the things that we'll be looking at is the other alternative cost options for that. So whether that's contracting it out or there's partnership opportunities here, but the reality is that there are a lot of ash trees And so we're not concerned with the ones that are deep in the forest, but we are concerned with the ones that are near trails.
I was thinking with the high use, this would be conservation land classification in particular.
Yeah, so this links back to our risk management guidelines, which would be the document that looks at, you know, how do we deal with risk on our operating.
Thank you.
Yes. You. Anything else? Okay, so not seeing any other comments, we'll go to the motion. So whereas Ontario Regulation 686/21, mandatory programs and services regulation requires conservation authorities to prepare a conservation area strategy on or before December 31st, 2024. And whereas the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority has developed a draft strategy, that the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority Board of Directors directs staff to circulate the strategy for consultation. A mover, Member Day, and a seconder, Member Farmer. Thank you for that. Final comments? Seeing none, we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? Okay, that is carried unanimously. Thank you so much. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, so that takes us into the next section. Item number 9, CEO's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I don't actually have a ton to report on this month. It's been very, very busy, but most of the things that have been keeping us busy, you've already seen through the meeting today. In addition to that, I participated in a couple of different working groups recently. So myself and Carl Sider in our office sat in on the climate adaptation workshop that Grey County hosted. So Grey County has a working group made up of different industry areas across the county. And so Conservation Authority was invited to sit on that because, as I'm sure you're all aware by now, all that we do is relating in one way or another to either climate adaptation or climate mitigation. So we hope to be able to partner with the county and with our municipal partners on the climate action work that we're doing. So that was a great opportunity. I also sat on the Healthy Lake Huron Steering Committee and went to one of the meetings that they hosted down in Clinton a few weeks ago. So this is a group that consists of a series of conservation authorities extending from St. Clair River all the way up to Lake St. Clair all the way up to ourselves at the north end, working on stewardship work that improves the quality of Lake Huron. And so there's specific projects. So for us, it's the Sauble River that we're focusing on. The money for this program goes into our stewardship programming and comes to us from what's called the Healthy Lake Huron Fund. So part of that funding comes from OMAFA, and part of that funding comes from the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. And so the work that we're doing on the ground with the landowners, with producers, to both better understand the impacts of agriculture on the landscape and also looking at best management practices to see how agricultural practices and environmental awareness and well-being can go hand in hand to make the watershed better for everybody. And so that is funded ultimately through the COA federal agreements, trickles down to the province and trickles down to us. So we're helping the province meet their goals under COA, and the province is there by helping the feds meet theirs. So really great initiative. Hope to see it grow over time. And I think when we start to see things like beach closures happening more frequently throughout our municipalities, and we've got a multi-billion-dollar industry in terms of tourism and recreation on our waterfronts, work like this that works hand in hand with agricultural producers to make the watershed better is going to be super, super important as we move. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is that we'll call it the soft unveiling of the Ingenia Cenotaph project will be happening on Remembrance Day this year. I want to thank Margaret for putting in a tremendous amount of work in terms of spearheading this project and working with community groups. Incredible uptake from the local community in Grey Highlands and around Eugenia. We had partners that included private industry, individuals, local community groups, the municipality helped out with the project. it's a unique situation where Cenotaph actually sits on one of our conservation areas. And so amazing work. We had funding from Community Foundation Great Bruce as well. And thanks to Margaret's efforts to push this along and the group that she was working with, all the work is complete. It will look much more awe-inspiring in the spring and summer when the plants are coming back. Nonetheless, a lot of work has been done and it's all set and geared to go. And the inaugural unveiling of this will happen on Remembrance Day this year. And so people showing up for 10:30.
The latest.
So I'm sure each of you probably have commitments on Remembrance Day, but if you don't or you're in the Eugene area, we'd love to see you there. We'll be there with the community to someday. So that's it from me, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. So moving to the chair's report, I just have to say that, thank you to Chief Sauble for all the work that they're doing, at Lake Eugenia, and, I will likely be at that remembrance, ceremony, so I do look forward to that. Otherwise, I have nothing else to add for my report. So moving along the agenda, we did have a closed session, but, it is not needed. So we will need a motion to remove the closed session portion of this agenda item. Mover, member Bell, seconder, member Day. And we'll just take a vote on that. Those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our meeting, and we are adjourned at 3:29. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.